So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to the Dry Lakebed. This is actually a map that we haven't seen in quite a while, mainly because with the coming of the new patches there were other maps that were sort of given as sort of flat field battles. Previously it was really only this and the grassy plain that you could have like a fully even match on, and this one was often used because it is slightly more visually sort of exciting, as it were, compared to the grassy plain, which is just obviously a completely flat grassy field. But now we've got stuff like Palinor Fields and the Frozen Lakebed, which also add to that, so there's a bit more variety. But it's good to be back on the Dry Lakebed as well, because this map was obviously used quite a lot in the previous versions of the game. And this is going to be a 2v2, as I said previously. I figured, again, this is going to be one of the sort of, again, open field battles, which aren't quite as long, but obviously this is just going to be slotted into the regular schedule, as I've said previously. And was sent in to me by DF Lister, which was probably, I think it was just over a month ago at this point. And again, you know, now that I'm doing it this way, I will be able to actually use replays like this, which is why I've sort of changed things around, and I will be doing more replays as a result. So, you know, I'm glad that I'm able to show what people send me, because I do feel a bit guilty in the past about sort of taking these replays and not being able to use all of them, but now hopefully I'll be able to use a lot more in terms of proportion. And he's going to be playing as Linden. His ally over in the distance there is Lucky Hussar playing as Gondor, and then across the way we have Shriek playing as Mirkwood and Solomon playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. So we'll start off with Lister, seeing as he is the one who sent me the replay. And he has got some Wardens of Harlinden, a couple of units of them it looks like. They are sort of overlapping a little bit. And the Wardens of Harlinden, of course, they are horse archers, but they also double as spear cavalry, which is a pretty potent combination when you think about it, because horse archers traditionally, if you can catch up to them, with a few exceptions in terms of the really elite ones, you should be able to beat them in melee. But the Wardens of Harlinden with an anti-cavalry bonus can, you know, they can be as targets, so that is worth bearing in mind. But obviously, as Linden horse archers, they are pretty lightly armoured, so you can still deal with them with foot archers fairly effectively if you are prepared to zone them out. We have the Mithlon Nobles, which, as far as chariots go, there are only two, obviously, in the game, the other one belonging to Rune, which have archers on the back. The Mithlon Nobles, however, technically speaking, are better because they have javelins, which do a lot more damage and are armour-piercing. They also have the Throne trait as well, which is the only Linden unit, I believe, to have that, despite the sort of ever-presence of javelins in their army, which means if you are going up against other factions with elephant-type units, which include, obviously, the chariots and the Mumakil, then this is going to be a unit which you can definitely bring as a hard counter to that, in addition to chariots being a lot better in the more recent versions of the game. Obviously very, very potent if you can get them running along the infantry lines. Let's have a look at his front line of archers. First of all, he's got some Harlinden Guard, which, considering Mirkwood are across the field, is probably a good idea, because they are a little bit tougher than the 4 Linden archers, and obviously Mirkwood definitely all about their skirmish power. Linden can do that, of course, but, you know, traditionally stuff like these 4 Linden archers will fall by the wayside when confronted with other good elven archers from the other elven factions. But even so, the 4 Linden archers should still be able to, in the numbers that Lister has brought them, in addition to another unit of Harlinden Guard, so a lot of archers here, they should still be able to at least compete in the skirmish game, which is important, because then back into the infantry line, Linden's versatility should start to come into it. Not only are there Harlinden Guard spears, but they've also got some Mithlon pikemen, which are, of course, very, very strong at holding a line. And considering the dwarves are on the other side of the field and they're going up against Mirkwood by the looks of things, they shouldn't have to worry too much about being pushed through with sheer mass, because that's not really what Mirkwood are all about. Harlinden infantry should be able to trade relatively evenly as well. I think they should outperform the Megil the Erin, which are the Mirkwood equivalent, but it depends what sort of army Mirkwood have brought, whether or not the Harlinden infantry will have an easier time or not. Obviously, against some of Mirkwood's higher tier elite units, which are a little bit more focused around the damage they deal, the Harlinden infantry could be in a little bit more trouble, we shall see. But as far as the front line goes, you can't really go far wrong with them for Linden. Some Mithlon pikemen there. We've got some Mithlon swordmasters as well, which are obviously an elven swordmaster unit. Every elven faction has an equivalent to this, whether it's the Imladris blade masters, the Lothlorien swordmasters, or the Hiri Lung. And the Mithlon swordmasters fill this gulf for the elves, of course. Very, very skillful. Should be good against any target they come up against because of their sheer skill, but obviously they can be a little bit vulnerable to ranged fire, as a lot of Linden's units can be. Naltar Guard, not so much though, of course. Heavily armoured. They've got a lot of skill as well, as I've said previously. Definitely the sort of unit which wouldn't be out of place in the Imladris roster, with their focus around being very difficult to kill. And then we've got some more Mithlon Swordmass, and that's just about it, I think, except for this one unit of cavalry over here, which is, of course, the General's Bodyguard, the Noldorin Horse Lords, very commonly used as the General's Bodyguard, because they are one of the deadlier knights in the game. Definitely a formidable sight to see on the battlefield. Now we shall move on to Lakisar and Gondor, and he's got some Ramas Ekor garrison cavalry, which you don't see an awful lot of. This is essentially militia cavalry, and it's very cheap, and it can potentially do quite a lot of damage if you charge incorrectly, but obviously you can't expect it to do quite as much charge damage as some more expensive lancers, and nor can you expect them to hold up too long in melee. But their cheap cost does mean that you can sort of use them in a little bit more of a disposable manner. And over here we also have the Pinneth Galen cavalry, which are definitely much stronger lancers. They've got a lot of skill as well. It's worth saying that the Gondor cavalry are now spear cavalry, so the Pinneth Galen cavalry are really your only. It's really sort of the standard lancer that you have as Gondor now, as opposed to being sort of just a slightly better version of the Gondor cavalry. Got a ballista, which facing down the dwarves is understandable, because the dwarves could bring their catapult or artillery of their own, and the ballista can also focus down some elite targets. The dwarves, of course, oftentimes want to stay where they are and defend a position. Got some Ramas Ekor garrison archers as well, potentially a very good unit, very, very cost effective, I must say. Every time I've seen them. Again, they don't do a lot of damage, only 4 missile damage, but they do have a shield value and they are pretty resilient, so they are very, very good tar pits, very, very good at making the enemy waste their ammunition, and they're quite a common sight, I think, for Gondor on field battles, just for that reason. It makes it very difficult for the enemy to get cost efficiency with their archers off against you, unless they are sort of paying a lot of attention. Got some civilians, 2 units of civilians, as we saw in the previous scenario. The civilians, they try their best, but oftentimes their best isn't good enough with their shovels and their pitchforks, but again, it's more warm bodies for the front line, I suppose. More Ramas Ekor garrison cavalry over here, and let's have a look at what this cavalry unit is. Over on this flank we have more Pinneth Galen cavalry, and then back here we get into some of the more serious units. He's done a lot of money saving so far, now he's got to spend his money. Naturally we've got the Fountain Guard, the most important unit for Gondor, I think, just because of how good they are. They tie the whole Gondor front line together. They're so deadly on the front line. Huge damage against cavalry and infantry alike. Obviously it's very much part of the Gondorian mindset there, those spears. Polearms in general, Gondor are very strong with. The Guards of Osgiliath in a similar vein. They're not super powerful pikes, but they're not exactly the highest costing pikes, considering how good they are, but you can only have 2 before the cost increases, so it's a bit of a strange one, but the Guards of Osgiliath are still very, very effective pikes for their price. Probably for their price individually, they're probably the most cost effective in the game, but it's worth saying that they aren't going to stand up to the likes of the Naru Sentinels, or that sort of higher quality pike, as it were. But we've got some Veterans of Osgiliath without the armour upgrade back here, but again, more archers, which are going to be devilishly difficult to skirmish down from a distance. More Fountain Guard. Axemen of Lasarnak without the armour upgrade, a full line of them in fact, so there's a lot of armour piercing there, which considering the dwarves are across the way is not too surprising, to be fair. And then just in behind them we have some Wardens of the White Tower and some Pelagia Marines, and the Wardens of the White Tower are the General's Bodyguard unit, obviously very, very stoic, defensive, one of the best sword and shield units, especially from the human kingdoms in the game. They might have a few hidden units, it's possible, not too many. They might have a unit of Athelian Rangers hidden away somewhere, but we shall see. Now, moving on to the red team, we have Solomon playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. Naturally, Erebor don't have any composite archers that they can sort of engage with at long range, so the Ironfoot crossbowmen are going to be here. Interestingly enough, their damage means that once they get into range, they should knock down the Ramas Ekor garrison archers pretty quickly. But even so, you don't really want to be using sort of precious crossbow ammunition on archers like that, because unlike earlier versions of the game, crossbow ammunition is now quite limited, so you do need to be careful there. And then we have the Dwarven Frontline, which is a mix of Ironfoot Spears and Ironfoot Halberds, which is a pretty classic combination at this point. Spears, of course. The phalanx is like this, the spears are just there to make sure that your line can't be pushed through quite so easily. And obviously then the polearms are there in the Ironfoot Halberds situation to do damage, obviously, but in pikemen it's there to hold for longer. Meanwhile, back here we have another unit of Ironfoot Spears on the flank. There are 2 spearmen on each flank? No. So just a spearman unit over here to try and prevent the cavalry. You can see that the dwarves do intend to sort of hold their ground. I'm not sure whether they'll be able to because of those that ballista. Now this is something which has been fairly common fairly recently, but I haven't actually seen it myself up until this battle. 2 Blacklock Engineers. Now this is going into the red limit, but with 2 Blacklock Engineers, your body piercing, armor piercing projectile count goes up considerably, and apparently this is extremely powerful. So we'll see this in this battle, I suppose. Got some more Ironfoot Spears in loose at the back, so we've got some tactical geometry from the dwarves, unsurprising there. Now this is good. We can see the Obsidian Guard. The Obsidian Guard are not a common pick. Most people, if they go for an Erebor infantry unit, I've noticed, tend to go for the Highborns of Erebor because they're shielded, a little bit safer of a pick. Obsidian Guard, obviously, though, dual wielding, very, very potent in melee. I don't think the Gondorians have brought anything which can match up to them. But we'll see. The Wardens of the White Tower would give it a good go, and that's where Dane is going to be hanging out. And then at the back, we've got some Iron for Hammer Guard without the General in it, so they can be used a little bit more freely. The Gondorians in particular don't have any single cavalry unit that could match up to them, but the Noldorin Horse Lords would be able to. And then finally, before we get into the battle at hand, which is only 16,000 frames long, actually shorter than some of the 1v1s I've been showing lately, we have Shriek playing as Mirkwood. He's got a front line of Hiri Ek, those spears of course, possibly because he was a little bit worried about a frontal cavalry charge from Linden. Those chariots would still be able to get through the spearmen, but even so, this is still a solid front line for Mirkwood. Mirkwood undoubtedly are going to have tons of hidden units, as is the way with them. So obviously there's going to be 230 tower here, I would imagine. We've got some Hiri Pang and Hiri Alth as well. Unsurprising to see those units, obviously very, very solid. Some more Hiri Alth. Back here we have the Arethalion Inanwaith, which we've seen several times of late just be absolute monsters. And then back here finally we have Thranduil, who is going to be riding with his Abranon Inanwaith, which again we've seen be very effective lately as well. But without any other units I can see, probably Thurny Tower, Catherley Tower, Delupeng, Yemendwia around here somewhere. Maybe we'll even see the Gwathi Ellen Gallen again. But let's start the battle and see how this goes. I'm not sure how this is going to pan out. The Dwarven position is obviously very, very solid and defensible, but it is going to allow that Ballista from Gondor to have essentially free reign at shooting in on them. And the Dwarves were obviously quite clearly not too eager on moving forward. Mirkwood obviously defending their flanks as well. If they were to move away from that position, Mirkwood would essentially leave the Dwarven flank open to harassment from Linden's mounted units. And it's also worth saying that the chariots could be particularly devastating against Mirkwood, who are obviously going to have a smaller army, but also the mass that they bring to the field is obviously going to be slightly less. Raining in the desert. It often seems to rain on the Dry Lakebed when I do a replay on it. You can see that the Iron for Hammer Guard obviously menacing with intent. Now it is worth saying that what the Dwarven player is doing here, it would appear to be anyway, is getting all of his units into loose formation, which is a good idea because even though he will still take damage from the Ballista, you would imagine, the loose formation will mitigate that quite a lot, and ultimately might make it. Oh, there's some Argway Inanwaith over here which were hidden, and they've moved over to try and help the Dwarves, although they don't want to be using their ammunition on the Ramazak or Garrison Archers either. It's a real catch-22 with that unit. You don't really want to be using any ammunition on them because they're so cheap. It seems like such a waste of money, but if you don't, they'll start shooting you, and eventually that 4 damage will start to pile up. You can see Linden obviously wrapping around to the sides. Mirkwood and the Dwarves definitely keen on defending, trying to form a solid core, which obviously with the Dwarves around they could be able to do. They do need to be careful because any gaps that appear will be exploited pretty mercilessly, especially by Linden, I must say. Well, this Dwarven Ballista is only using its standard ammunition rather than its flaming ammunition, so it's going to be a little bit harder to see what it's actually hitting. I can actually hear it, but I can't actually see where its bolts are landing. There's the Aradirith Amon Lank as well. So Mirkwood have definitely invested in some of their more expensive archers that can hide. And the Aradirith, of course, got their armour piercing, so probably for the best actually that they're over on this Gondorian side of things. Because when push comes to shove in melee, their axes will be much more useful against some of the more armoured Gondorian units. In conjunction with these halberds, the melee fight might be a little bit intimidating for Gondor. Their Fountain Guard are very strong, of course, but the Axemen of Lasarnak, while they may be armour-piercing, not exactly the finest in terms of their stats. The Dwarves should be able to hold relatively firmly against them, and with the support of some Mirkwood archers, it'll be lights out for them pretty quickly. But this match isn't too long, so I'd imagine pretty soon we're going to see some sort of advance, and I imagine that's going to have to come from Linden and Gondor, because obviously Erebor and Mirkwood have made their position very clear. They are not going to move from this area. They've set up their stakes nicely. They've got their tactical geometry. They are not going to budge. But Gondor are going to be moving forward. And the sacrificial lambs, as they often are going to be the Ramazak or Garrison Archers. Again, I'm a big fan of the Ramazak or Garrison Archers for the reasons that I've already mentioned. You can't really go far wrong with them, because even if they die without doing much, they're really cheap as far as archers go. Definitely a very good tool that Gondor has in their roster. They've got some decent archers, but you know, the Ramazakh Garrison archers might honestly be my favourite of the bunch, even though they're technically speaking the worst. Purely because they're so easy to use, ease of use. And now the Ramazakh Garrison Cavalry is also here, presumably as a sort of stopgap to make sure that these archers can't simply be charged from the front. And considering that Erebor and Mirkwood haven't brought tons of cavalry, that's fine. If Mirkwood in particular have brought quite a lot of cavalry, just that would probably not have been enough. But the Ironfoot crossbowmen are actually going to be moving forward, so they are going to engage in a skirmish fight with the garrison archers, which I would imagine the Ironfoot crossbowmen will win fairly easily, but even so, that's precious ammunition that they're throwing away, basically. It will at least get rid of these very annoying lower tier archers, but I don't know. Crossbows can be a very good anti-cavalry tool as well, and without these crossbows in particular, like you can see Linden moving their mounted units out to the far flank over there. Without the crossbows, they might struggle a little bit more. Again, the Hammer Guard and the Abranoni Nanwaith are still not going to be the easiest things to carve their way through, especially not for the Gondorian Lancers, but I do think that the Linden Gondor alliance does actually need a cavalry advantage here, considering the very defensive nature that's been set out thus far. The Thurney Tower, meanwhile, the Mirkwood Scurv, this poor unit of Thurney Tower has basically drawn the ire of all of the Linden archers, which obviously, when it's 3 or 4 against 1, there's only going to be one victor there. So this unit of Thurney Tower now very stricken. The Hiri Pang are also in range. The Ballista is trying to chip away at the Hiri Ek with some limited success. There's Thurney Tower out on that flank as well. There's 3 Mirkwood archers over here and 4 Linden archers, but there's also the Linden horse archers. So actually, from a ranged point of view, Linden might have the advantage over Mirkwood here, if Mirkwood keep their archers, their higher tier archers anyway, over helping Erebor. Which I would say they probably need their archers to go back and help out against Linden at this point. Now the Ironfoot Hammer Guard are going to charge forward. The Ramazakh Garrison Cavalry is over here. They're going to charge into the cavalry now. They took some... I mean, this is the Ironfoot Hammer Guard essentially having to carve their way through tons and tons of lower tier units. But the Hammer Guard have now also abandoned their post, and this is going to allow the Pinneth Galen Cavalry to get a nice frontal charge on the Ironfoot crossbows. So that's good play, that, from Gondor. Again, the Pinneth Galen Cavalry are going to take losses from doing this. The Blacklock Engineers are there, going to reap some heavy losses on them, but that's Ironfoot crossbows that are dead, although the Pinneth Galen Cavalry are also now probably going to be not long for this world. We shall see. Just keeping an eye on the Linden Cavalry there to make sure it doesn't move in, but so far it's still mostly trading blows. Blacklock Engineers on both sides are firing their ammunition, but honestly, I think it's a little bit soon to be using their ammunition. They're firing their ammo into the Ramazakh Garrison archers. The Noldorin Horse Lords were there in support, and Pinneth Galen Cavalry defeated. Defeat does seem certain. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard, however, have taken some losses. The Ramazakh Garrison Cavalry using their numbers to basically charge into the full unit of Ironfoot crossbows, doing limited damage, but even so. Got some civilians moving up around the flank. It's been good play from Gondor so far, although admittedly part of that is the fact that the Ramazakh Garrison archers have definitely done their job. They've been absorbing Blacklock Engineer fire, which, if there's anything the Blacklock Engineers don't want to be shooting at, it's low tier units. You need to wait until there's a nice blob of an infantry fight and then get your Blacklock Engineers to shoot right along it. And that's when they are at their very best. They are basically crossbow rangers in the way that they work, so that's what you really want to be doing with them. Civilians moving up, Gondor starting to apply pressure. Now I think we're going to start to see the engagement. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard trying to do what they can. Ramazakh Garrison Cavalry are routing, which is unsurprising, but the Dwarven Frontline is going to have to fall back. The civilians are here, they're already wavering though. Ooh, this could be really bad for the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. They're charging right into the front of the Guards of Osgiliath. That must have been a misclick or something. Even with how resilient the Ironfoot Hammer Guard are, the Guards of Osgiliath are going to very, very quickly bring about the end of a lot of these Ironfoot Hammer Guard, and they're probably going to rout at this point. The archer there, and even if they get through, they're only going to charge into these armor-piercing axes. And yeah, they're fighting to the death, so that's going to be the end of the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, which means the cavalry contingent of the red team at this point consists of 1 unit, which is going to be rough for them. Civilians are over here. You can see actually in the backfield over here that the 1 cavalry unit from the red team, the Abranon Inanwe, is being harassed by the Wardens of Linden, which is exactly what Mirkwood don't want. As soon as the hit points of the Abranon are expended, they're going to fall away very, very quickly. Missile fire is a real problem for some of the Mirkwood mounted units. The chariots are still going to be menacing with intent. They could be the ones to deliver the killing blow. There's some Delu, Yem and Dwyer there, which have revealed themselves. Still Mirkwood sort of being slowly but surely worn down. The Axemen of Lasarnak are now moving in, which is probably a good time to start to turn the speed down to half speed. As we see here, the Axemen of Lasarnak with the civilians, and actually the guards of Osgiliath as well, are going to be getting into the Dwarven Frontline. Dwarven Frontline not looking as neat as it once did, which probably favours Gondor a little bit. You can see more Axemen of Lasarnak moving forwards here, Wardens of the White Tower. They do still need to be careful of where the Blacklock Engineers are, because now when the blobs do start up is when they can start to do some real damage. The Pelargir Marines getting into a position where they can fire. We've got some Ironfoot Spears over here which overextended themselves a little bit, and now they are going to be put to the sword by these Fountain Guard. See the Fountain Guard very, very strong. And just back here we can see the Ironfoot Halberds. Guards of Osgiliath actually, they're going to allow the Axemen of the Sarnak to charge in first and then probably back them up. That would be a good way to do it, make sure the axes get their charge bonus off. This is a... You can see that there are blood sprays going on all around here, so crossbow bolts of varying descriptions are being just fired in, which is causing a bit of panic among the Gondorian ranks. The Erebor units over here seem to be fairly comfortable with how the situation is unfolding. Particularly with the Obsidian Guard over here, they will definitely be fine. The Gondorians over here don't have a single unit which can match up to that unless they bring the Wardens of the White Tower over here, which I doubt they will. Meanwhile, the Abranon Inanwe, after taking some damage, are now coming back over to here. Mirkwood are looking pretty scattered at this point. It might be time for the Linden units to come in. You can see they are now starting to move, although they are quite far away. It could be that Gondor advanced either too soon or Linden have advanced too late, and that could come back to bite them. We'll see. Ramasek or Garrison Archers, presumably they're out of ammunition at this point, just being committed. And they can make, again, decent tar pits in melee as well. I mean, the shield value does contribute to a defensive stat. And they've actually got decent armour as well, as a lot of Gondorian units have. For a lower tier unit, they've got decent armour anyway. So just these units coming in here, obviously with the civilians, there's a lot of chaff that the dwarves have to cut their way through. And it's going to be important here for the Gondorians to pick and choose their fights. And you can see now that the Pelargir Marines firing their javelins at various targets, which obviously these armour-piercing projectiles are going to be very, very important. Doing a lot of damage to the Ironfoot Halberds and Spears, which make up the front line. The Fountain Guard are going around the flank, and they need to at this point. I mean, a lot of these Gondorian units have been caught up on this one unit of Ironfoot Spears, which has essentially held up a unit of Fountain Guard and Wardens of the White Tower, which... This could be important. This could be the sort of thing which gives the dwarves a notable leg up in this infantry fight. Because Gondor really haven't left anything at home. They've committed basically everything. There's some veterans of Osgiliath in the back and a ballista. But apart from that, everything has been thrown forth to try and deal with these dwarven units. See Ramasek or Garrison Archers. I may have been singing their praises for most of this battle, but they are still militia tier archers. Their morale in melee against solid dwarven infantry is not going to be the finest. We've got the Agwe Inanwe over here, which are firing into the Pelargir Marines. Linden definitely need to get onto this, get into this frontline engagement pretty quickly. Their chariots could also carve right through Mirkwood and maybe even do some damage to the dwarves. We shall see as the battle unfolds, but I think now we can turn it up to 1 speed as things carry on. That Ironfoot Spearman unit is finally out of the way, and we now see the Wardens of the White Tower and the Fountain Guard are going to move in as well, which does mean that this side should start to flip in favour of Gondor. But elsewhere, the Pelargir Marines out of ammunition, presumably getting committed to melee. Again, they can make okay makeshift infantry, but they're nothing really to write home about. Meanwhile, that's a big rout. You can Gondorians bearing the brunt there. The Obsidian Guard combined with the Dwarven infantry units, really a lot of these units should come back though. There's a lot of them, but that Axeman of Lasarnak unit won't if they continue to get hit in the back by those Blacklock engineers. But now finally Linden have arrived a little bit too late to assist that fallen Gondorian line. Noldorin Guard getting into melee with the Hirti Ek. So Linden's infantry should be fine here. I imagine Linden are going to win this infantry engagement. The Hetherley Tower have revealed themselves. Harlinden infantry facing off against them, but the Blacklocks are maybe going to help them. They might have used up their ammunition, which is going to be a big boon for the blue team. The Pikes are coming forward with the support of the Mithlon Swordmasters, going up against the Hiri Alth. You would imagine that this is going to go in favour of Linden. Meanwhile, these chariots just running through this area, destroying stakes, running over infantry units. And that looked like the last of the Abranon, which only 12 of them. Yeah, the Mithlon nobles are causing havoc here in the Mirkwood backlines, doing a lot of damage. Obviously, their javelins are going to assist with that as well. Thurney Tower moving in as well. So yeah, I would imagine that Linden are actually going to sweep Mirkwood aside with relative ease over here, and part of that comes down to the fact that Mirkwood did commit units to help the dwarves, but that may yet pay dividends because it looks as though Gondor are starting to falter. The Axemen of Lasarnak are over here, still fighting. The Fountain Guard will be a difficult unit to break down, but you would imagine that they still would be overwhelmed by the forces that are amassed against them. Warns of the White Tower are facing the Aradirith, as we just saw their general die. There goes Thranduil though. One general each. The Gondorian lower tiers will be affected by the loss of a general more so than the Elves will though. The Elves very unlikely to rout because of a loss of a general most of the time. Fountain Guard still fighting. The Gondorians really at this point can only hope to do as much damage as possible, and they have done damage to the dwarves. So at this point Mirkwood needs really to do a lot of damage in return to the advance of Linden. The Wardens of Harlinden, Spear Cavalry, the Noldorin Horse Lords, Knights. You can see here the melee fight over here. The Arguein Anwaith are over here now though in melee. And 1-to-1, looks like they're going to defeat the Mithlon Swordmasters. Obviously the Arguein Anwaith very expensive, so you would expect them to do very well. Some Blacklock engineers over here. Only half the Linden army remains, so it's been a very quick and brutal engagement between the two elves, but Linden have certainly had the better of it. Gondor still has those veterans of Osgiliath in the backfield. Oftentimes a ranged unit with full ammunition in the late game can be a really important thing, and they can start to do damage to those Ironfoot halberds. Any unshielded unit. Now we can see Linden continuing to move forward, carrying their momentum across the field. And their army looks to be in relatively decent condition, honestly. It says that they've lost half their troops, but all of the important stuff going into the late game seems to still be intact. In particular, these Mithlon nobles have not lost a single unit model yet, which is going to be a real problem for the dwarves, because the dwarves, of course, will obviously want to set up a strong, solid front line. The chariots are unlikely to allow that to happen. Indeed, they are going to make a beeline for the dwarves at this point. Chariots, they do need to be careful that they don't get bogged down against anti-cavalry units. You can see one of them did fall there, two of them actually. Another one fell. And part of that does come down to the fact that there is a crossbow line over here. The chariots are now getting into the crossbow line, as are the Wardens of Harlinden, trying to rob the dwarves of those armour-piercing and body-piercing projectiles when it pertains to the Blacklocks. There are the Wardens. Meanwhile, let's go and have a look at what the Gondorians are doing. The Aradirith, they're actually winning against the Aradirith now. The combination of Fountain Guard and Wardens of the White Tower, enough to turn this fight around, it would seem. Axemen of the Sarnak, which presumably have returned from routing, but they're already shaken. I can't imagine they'd last long in melee, unless they just blob up their men. Well, that's unfortunate for Linden, I suppose. The general is dead. The Noldorin Horse Lords, which had charged into this engagement over here. Finishing off the Hiri Alth. There's the Gondorian Ballista crew, fighting the Blacklock Engineers. So I imagine there that the Bearded Elf was hit by a stray crossbow bolt. Here are the Obsidian Guard, still in relatively good health, and with their very high skill, they can go toe-to-toe with a lot of Elven units. Mithlon Swordmasters are charging forward to meet them in melee. 4 Linden Archers are routing. this battle has devolved into complete chaos. The dwarves have sort of set up a front line in preparation for meeting the Linden advance. And here comes the Linden Guard charging into the Dwarven Frontline. Ironfoot crossbows. Ammunition from the crossbows at this point is going to be very necessary, I think, for the dwarves to have much of a chance here, because I think Linden had a better engagement against Mirkwood than the dwarves had against Gondor. Indeed, Gondor is still alive. Naltar and Horswords charging into the side of these Obsidian Guard. Obsidian Guard doing their best, but they're having to fight a combination of Mithlon Swordmasters and Naltar Guard. There are the Ironfoot Spears pursuing, routing poor Linden archers. These spears need to help the Obsidian Guard. They're good, but they're being overwhelmed. Although I think the dwarves in general are going to struggle with being overwhelmed at this point. Being attacked in the rear now by veterans of Osgiliath, which again make good makeshift infantry. Harland infantry getting around the flank. They're still having to deal with these Gondorian units in the back lines as well, which may fall apart, but at this point the Gondorians have done, they did what they could. You know, they definitely distracted a lot of resources. Mirkwood bringing those skirmishes over to help the dwarves against Gondor was probably unneeded. The Aradirith perhaps just because they are AP in melee, but they needed more missiles to deal with the Linden archer line, and ultimately they just weren't able to do that. Linden took full advantage of their horse archers as well. That one unit of high tier Mirkwood cavalry was just, you know, it was always going to be kited to death by those Linden horse archers. And at this point I think the battle is going to start to go against the red team and in favour of the blue team. The Obsidian Guard fighting hard though. Victory is a distinct possibility. They've really done very well for themselves. The Ironfoot Spears did come to their aid in the end. There's some Hirialth, which may have returned from routing, as well as some Thurney Tower. Not fully over yet, but mostly over, shall we say. Veterans of Osgiliath. They've caught something in melee, some black blocks. And there aren't really enough black blocks to stand up to this sort of pressure. Ironfoot crossbows, defeat is a distinct possibility, and they are wavering, and that's because they're up against Fountain Guard and Wardens of the White Tower, or at least what's left of them. Here are the Hirialth. Not a lot of the Linden cavalry left alive, but they certainly did their job. The Naltar Guard, I mean, the Obsidian Guard are doing a lot of damage here. Only 34 of them remaining, but they're doing a lot of work. Ironfoot Spears, so actually the dwarves are trying to wrap up this line. They could do it. I mean, the Obsidian Guard are a real tough nut to crack, and as far as a single unit goes, I don't think Linden have got anything left to deal with them. Their highest tier unit was the Naltar Horse Lords, and they're still alive, but there is only 5 of them. Nice rear charge there into the Hirialth, who were trying to come to the aid of the Black Blocks in slaying the veterans. Again, just having 5 knights running around the field might be all that it takes at this point. And there goes Dane. Oof. The dwarves just... that's got to be racist, right? Not that the elves and dwarves care about that against one another, I suppose. Naltar and Horse Swords going in there. They do need to be careful. I mean, the Ironfoot Spears are an anti-cavalry unit, but they're starting to waver now. The loss of the general at this stage, when the manpower for both sides is running a little lower, may very well be all that it takes to decide this fight. The Ironfoot crossbows doing their best. I mean, there's not many Gondorians left on the field. The veterans of Osgiliath are doing their best. They're kind of cancelling one another out, the veterans and the Hirialth, with the support of the Linden cavalry, though. That's probably going to go in favour of the blue team, although this is very, very close. I mean, the Obsidian Guard have done a tremendous job. But there are only 17 of them remaining, and their allies all around them are shaken, thinking about running away, so I don't think it's going to be enough. But even so, the Obsidian Guard definitely proving themselves to be a very worthwhile unit here, with their dual-wielding swords and axes. Linden infantry defeat seems certain. Ballista crew just running all over the place. Thurney Tower firing their missiles. Civilians have come back from routing. At this point, just having a unit of 76, regardless of what it is enough to sort of help swing the fight in your favour even further. Naltar Guard are still alive, despite having a savaging at the hands of the Obsidian Guard. Just all sorts of carnage everywhere. It's a good, like, there's a good wide engagement as well. There's sort of signs of battle all over the place. And it was a good advance, I think, ultimately. We'll go into the ins and outs of that when the defeat seems almost certain. Really? The announcer seems to think very highly of the Obsidian Guard's chances. Which I don't. Considering there's a horde of civilians and veterans of Osgiliath on the way to further drive home the numbers advantage. Also, a lot of these Linden units are pikes, which it's going to be difficult for the Obsidian Guard to start landing hits when it comes down to brass tacks. They're shaken. There's also Fountain Guard, however depleted. The Naltar and Horse Swords are still proving to be a bit of a problem, although there's only 2 left at this point. The civilians are routing. I mean, I would be amazed if the Obsidian Guard could pull this out. It does still say victory seems certain for them, which is amazing. These Ironfoot Spears definitely need to stay in melee with them and help them, otherwise the Obsidian Guard will be singled out. I think the presence of these Fountain Guard might help a lot. All of these Polearms should, in theory, mean the Obsidian Guard don't stand much of a chance in this situation. There's only 12 of them, for God's sake. If they can fight their way out of this... Where did the Naltar and Horse Swords go? They might have all died. No, they're over there. I think dealing with, like, the dregs of the Mirkwood army, the Thurney Tower were over there. Harland and infantry are starting to rout. The Obsidian Guard could fight their way out of this. I mean, it's entirely possible that they could cause the Linden forces to rout. But the Fountain Guard will stay and fight to the end, with, you know, their AP as well. This is so close. Those civilians have come back, but I can't imagine they'll stay in melee for too long anyway, but it's still another obstacle the Obsidian Guard will have to overcome. The Ironfoot Spears are wavering. The Arguay Inanwaith are back. I think that might be it. I think that might be the victory for the red team. Where did they come from? Have they been hidden all this time? I mean, it's hard to tell when there's this much carnage all over the battlefield, but yeah, with the Arguay Inanwaith, the Obsidian Guard will be able to fight their way out of this. That's amazing. I thought for the life of me that, to be fair, without the Arguay Inanwaith, the blue team probably would have won. They definitely had a huge percentage advantage. You can actually see here that they still do. They're still 6% ahead, technically speaking, the blue team, because they have technically killed a lot more, but a lot of their forces have routed, and the routing has actually decided this fight, I think. Yeah. There's only a few veterans of Osgiliath that are left, so the red team are going to win on the back of their elite units and being able to stand. So this is another fight which has effectively been decided by routing. I'm glad that I came back to do this fight, because this one was really close. This is all that remains: a unit of Ironfoot Spears, the Obsidian Guard, and the Arguay Inanwaith.
We have nothing to be ashamed of. It's but a cruel twist of fate that snatched victory from our grasp.
Well, I have to say that the MVPs of that fight have to be the Obsidian Guard. They did amazingly well at just sort of tanking and holding and killing off so many men, and they were in fights where often they were hopelessly outnumbered, and they still did very well. Mirkwood coming to their aid a lot, so obviously the Dwarves doing very, very well for themselves. I think ultimately what lost this fight for the blue team was the fact that Linden and Gondor did not advance at the same time, or at least close enough together. By the time Gondor was engaging with the Dwarven Frontline, Linden's infantry still hadn't moved, which probably means they maybe needed to coordinate with one another a little bit better. If they did, then this probably would have gone differently. I think they probably would have won this fight if that had happened, because then obviously Gondor would have had more troops in the late game rather than them being focused down so heavily by some of the Dwarven and Mirkwood skirmishes. But we'll never know now. Let's have a look at what did the damage for Linden. Naltar and Horse Swords, obviously they were alive right into the late game, 197, even though they were quite bruised and battered. The Mithlon Nobles got 96. Seemed like they were doing quite well, and then they started falling apart quite quickly, probably due to the fact that the crossbows finally got them in their sights and started doing a lot of damage to them. But initially they caused a lot of havoc in the Mirkwood lines. All of the skirmishers doing very well. They won the initial skirmish with Mirkwood. which for Linden is good, but then they did have to invest quite a lot of their money in terms of their army into this skirmish line in order to accomplish that. So there is a case for saying maybe you should have dropped a unit of Harlenden Guard and maybe got another unit of Harlenden infantry instead. Noldering Guard doing well for themselves. Again, they were alive quite late into the day. This unit of Mithlon Swordmasters got dumpstered by the Arguei Nanwaith. This other one did okay for itself. Mithlon Pikes, again, very differing stories depending on which unit you're looking at. Harland Infantry did okay, but again, they were up against elves, so it's not a terrible kill count in the end. Yeah, very well done to the red team. Well played by both. I think Mirkwood, despite initially having a few difficulties with the skirmish fight, ultimately they did pull it out, and particularly well played to the dwarves. I think their composition was pretty well rounded for the situation at hand. I think maybe the Blacklocks could have been used a little bit better. You know, they were firing off against targets which maybe weren't ideal, and if they had picked their targets better, then the red team probably would have won this with a little bit more gusto. But even so, Obsidian Guard's definitely the MVP in that one, which is good to see because you don't see them an awful lot. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which is probably going to be another scenario.